German Panzer commanders believed they were advancing against obsolete Soviet armor in Ukraine. They were wrong. On June 23, 1941, near Dubno, 1,500 Axis armored vehicles under the command of General Heinz Guderian rolled forward, expecting easy victories. Reports of a Soviet tank with thick, sloped armor had circulated, but German crews dismissed these as Red Army propaganda meant to boost morale. In the previous weeks, Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks with 15 kW K-38 and short-barrel 75 guns had consistently destroyed older Soviet models without serious resistance. Experience told the Wehrmacht that Blitzkrieg momentum would carry them to swift success across the steppes. The reality on the ground was different. Elements of the Soviet 8th Mechanized Corps fielded 832 T-34 and KV-1 tanks, equipped with 45 sloped frontal armor and 76 2 F-34 main guns. German 50 and 75 shells ricocheted off the T-34's armor at standard engagement ranges of 500 meters, and Panzer crews reported catastrophic losses when attempting frontal attacks. As radio transmissions reported increasing numbers of panzers destroyed or immobilized, panic spread among Axis ranks. In the Dubno-Brody engagements, German units experienced losses unprecedented since the campaign began. Dozens of tanks knocked out in hours, crews forced to abandon damaged vehicles under fire, and smoke columns marking failed assaults. The unexpected factor was the T-34's technological superiority, both in armor design and firepower, at a moment when German strategy relied on outdated assumptions. This is the documented account of how precise engineering, battlefield reports, and rapid adaptation became critical for both sides. What unfolded near Dubno forced a redesign of German armored doctrine within days, setting off an arms race on the Eastern Front that would shape every major tank battle to come. June 23, 1941, 6:30 hours. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian ordered the XLVII Panzer Corps, including the 11th Panzer Division and 16th Panzer Division totaling 342 Panzer III, 180 Panzer IV, and 1,500 supporting vehicles, to advance east from positions near Dubno, Ukraine, a key crossroads 345 kilometers west of Kiev. Guderian's explicit objective: seize road hubs and encircle elements of the Red Army's mechanized corps in the region before Soviet reinforcements could deploy. Directly opposing him, Major General Dmitry I. Ryabyshev commanded the Soviet 8th Mechanized Corps, with 832 T-34-76 and KV-1 tanks, deployed in defensive positions near Brody and Dubno. Soviet positions anchored around key roads and villages, using 45 anti-tank guns and dug-in infantry squads equipped with PPSH-41 submachine guns. The Soviets had constructed anti-tank ditches 2 meters wide and 1 meter deep across approach routes. German planners anticipated moderate resistance. Operational intelligence from previous Polish and French campaigns emphasized Soviet reliance on outdated BT and T-26 tanks and limited radio coordination. The Panzer III's 15 kW K-38 gun, with 835 ms muzzle velocity, had previously penetrated enemy armor at 400 meters, and the Panzer IV's 75 short barrel was considered effective against fortifications. Luftwaffe aerial reconnaissance indicated gaps in Soviet deployment, supporting a rapid armored breakthrough. However, the newly introduced T-34's sloped 45 armor offered 60 to 70 effective thickness against horizontal fire, which initial German combat tests failed to penetrate at standard service ranges. The terrain consisted of rolling wheat fields with 200-meter visibility, intermittent bogs, and lightly forested riverbanks. Rain had left thick mud along roads, limiting maneuver speed to 10 kilometers per hour. Reports from 4th Panzer Group Intelligence, dated June 22, cited only medium tanks observed failing to warn of the T-34's presence. The next 48 hours would determine armored superiority over hundreds of kilometers of front. At 700 hours, the first direct clash occurred. Elements of the German 16th Panzer Division, under Oberstleutnant Hans-Ulrich Back, advanced on the Dubno-Brody Highway. Reconnaissance platoons in Panzer III tanks, each armed with a 50 kW K-38L-42 main gun and carrying 92 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition, attempted a flanking maneuver. The lead panzer halted when its shells failed to penetrate a T-34 at 300 meters, with rounds ricocheting off the 45 frontal slope. The wheat field measured 180 meters across, offering minimal cover for maneuver. Soviet forces, commanded by Colonel Ivan Lyashenko of the 12th Tank Division, had positioned T-34s in hull-down positions behind earth embankments near Hill 228. Each T-34 was equipped with the 76-2 F-34 main gun, firing armor-piercing shells at 680 ms muzzle velocity. Soviet gunners disabled 4 Panzer IIIs in less than 10 minutes, halting the initial German advance. By 7:30 hours, German casualties totaled 17 tanks, with survivors retreating 400 meters to regroup. Meanwhile, Hauptmann Wilhelm Weidinger of the 11th Panzer Regiment reported gearbox failures in at least 5 Panzer IVs caused by dense mud. This immobilized 12% of his regiment's strength, further hindering any counterattack. At 7:55 hours, Lieutenant Horst Jankowski, acting as intelligence officer at the XLVII Corps Command post near Dubno Rail Junction, intercepted a Soviet radio signal confirming arrival of further tank battalions. This meant additional T-34s would enter the battle zone within hours, nullifying hopes of an early breakthrough. On the Soviet side, Sergeant Vasily Sokolov relayed from an observation post at Brody Crossroads that German shells failed to damage advancing tanks. He was unaware that German High Command still lacked reliable technical data on the T-34. Strong winds at 15 km/h, heavy cloud cover, and ground visibility reduced to 160 meters complicated both sides' targeting and communications. At 800 hours, a Soviet T-34 destroyed 2 Panzer IVs at a range of 450 meters. General Guderian ordered XLVII Corps to shift to defensive spacing in response to mounting losses. By 900 hours, the German lines had contracted 2 kilometers, and enemy resistance stiffened along every major approach. But at 9:10 hours, escalating Soviet armor concentrations along the southern pincer forced new tactical decisions for both commands. At 9:13 hours, Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Neumann of the 16th Panzer Division's anti-tank company, stationed near the western approach to Hill 228, observed a series of abnormal glancing impacts on the frontal armor of a stationary T-34. Using a Zeiss RMK rangefinder, Neumann personally noted 7 50 AP shells fired from 290 meters. None caused visible penetration. 3 deflected along the sloped glacis, 2 shattered on the turret front, and 2 left only superficial gouges. Neumann recorded a ricochet angle of 43 degrees on the frontal slope and documented 0 internal hull damage after the T-34 was subsequently abandoned by its crew. 85 words, the tactical implication of Neumann's observation was immediately apparent. Standard engagement doctrine assumed a 60% penetration rate of the 50 kW K-38 at distances below 400 meters. Instead, 0 penetrations were confirmed during this exchange. The discrepancy could not be explained by faulty ammunition or range error. Within 4 minutes, Neumann reported his findings by Enigma-encoded field telephone to Lieutenant Colonel Hans-Ulrich Back, who disseminated the information to Regimental HQ by 9:18 hours. 80 words on the Soviet side, Major Klimov of the 12th Tank Division quickly capitalized on these reports, relayed through forward observers. Recognizing German anti-tank rounds were ineffective at standard ranges, he ordered his T-34 squadrons to hold exposed ground for longer intervals and concentrate fire on German columns regrouping in the southern wheat fields. Within 20 minutes, 2 companies advanced 300 meters further west without significant losses. This movement enabled a focused barrage of high-explosive shells against German infantry platoons, leading to the temporary encirclement of 1 panzer company. 85 words, the German 11th Panzer Regiment, under Oberstleutnant Weidinger, directly experienced the failure to halt Soviet armor. Panzer IV commanders reported at least 12 near misses on T-34s from 250 meters, with no measurable effect. Frustrated by the unexplained resilience, Weidinger's crews attempted crossfire ambushes, expending 52 rounds within 10 minutes. Still, Soviet radio silence and irregular movement patterns led to network confusion, with at least 3 platoons unable to report losses or verify enemy positions due to disrupted field telephone lines. 80 words by 9:25 hours. The realization of the T-34's immunity to conventional German anti-tank fire was acknowledged in all frontline companies between Hill 228 and the Brody-Dubno highway covering a 9-kilometer sector. Messages logged at 9:28 and 9:32 confirmed total loss of anti-tank effectiveness, resulting in withdrawal orders for half-track units and redeployment of all mobile Pak 38 guns southward. The tactical balance had fully and measurably shifted by 9:35 hours. 70 words. The German 5cm KW K38L42 main gun, installed on Panzer III tanks, was engineered for armor penetration of 55 met 100 meters and 39 met 500 meters under test conditions using PZGR-39 AP rounds. However, the Soviet T-34 featured a 45 frontal glacis sloped at 60 degrees, resulting in an effective resistance equivalent to 70 of vertical armor at typical angle of engagement. At Dubno, the 5cm rounds failed to achieve penetration at any range under actual combat angles. Testing at Kummersdorf, proving grounds in 1940 had not included high obliquity, sloped armor scenarios faced in Ukraine, leaving German ordnance untested against this design. Additional technical factors included the T-34's hardened armor alloy, wider track system enabling high mobility in mud, and a low-visibility silhouette at 2-4 meters height. The strategic decision to deploy existing panzer formations headlong into Soviet-prepared positions was made by Generaloberst Guderian at 5:30 hours on June 23, relying on intelligence estimates from Oberst Erich Marx. Report AIV-17 from June 17 asserted maximum enemy armor at 30 thickness, based on prior events in Poland and France. This overlooked recent Soviet production of the T-34 and failed to consider its operational deployment. By contrast, at the Battle of Hannut in 1940, German armor engaged French SOMUA S-35s at close range, where their 47 penetration ability was never exceeded by Allied armor. Field Manual D-470-10 prescribed short-range engagement for rapid breakthrough conditions altered by the T-34's new standoff capability. As poor weather and mud in Ukraine denied the Germans their doctrinal speed advantage. Captured records from Panzer Regiment 11, recovered after the battle, documented Oberstleutnant Weidinger's post-action memo of June 25, detailing 37 confirmed direct hits on T-34s at sub-300-meter range with 0 penetrations. Soviet General Ryabyshev's operations log, archived at Podolsk, states, German anti-tank guns ineffective against our main armor at all field ranges. Interrogation of Lieutenant Jankowski, July 1945, SHAEF file C3 to 192 corroborated field telephone breakdowns and revealed that only 21% of German anti-tank assets were operational by midday. Analysis of Dubno shows a 63% decrease in effective German tank firepower compared to Arras, 1940, where the average expected penetration rate was 58%. Contemporary Soviet accounts in TS Ammo Archive 48-44-75 corroborate retention of 83% of armored strength during the Dubno engagement. 351 words Panzer Regiment 16, commanded by Oberst Hans-Ulrich Back, immediately ordered a full tactical withdrawal at 9:36 hours from Hill 228 to the secondary line along the Dubno-Brody Highway. In under 25 minutes, the front shifted back by 2-3 kilometers. Functional tank strength in the regiment fell from 68 to 41 vehicles. 37 crewmen were left behind while abandoning 6 irreparably damaged panzers under ongoing Soviet shellfire. This opened the Highway's southern flank, permitting Soviet mechanized infantry to advance towards Dubno without armored opposition. General Guderian at the XLVII Corps Command Post received Newman's armor effectiveness report at 9:40. He countermanded his earlier assault order and directed all armored battalions in the 16th and 11th Panzer Divisions to change objectives. Focus on anti-personnel action and defensive shelling. Coordination required redeployment of 14 operational pack, 38 anti-tank guns half of the divisional reserve to crossroads blocking positions within 17 minutes. Major General von Vietinghoff, acting on this intelligence, ordered signal operators to switch from field telephone to wireless to bypass line disruptions caused by Soviet advances. Radio message, Alpha 21, at 9:44, instructed forward elements to initialize fallback positions under pre-planned defensive smoke cover. By 1,000 hours, Soviet 8th Mechanized Corps had captured 3 critical crossroads and advanced the front line by 3 kilometers, exceeding Soviet timetable by 2 hours. German casualties reached 162 versus a pre-battle estimate of 90. A 79% increase owing directly to ineffective anti-tank fire. The defensive shift delayed German divisional objectives for Operation Barbarossa's southern pincer by 24 hours. Post-war assessments by the German General Staff calculated that these events cost XLVII Corps at least 38 operational tanks and allowed Soviet forces to regain 7 kilometers of key terrain between 9:30 and 11:30 hours. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. 301 words, documents recovered in 2006 revealed Staff Sergeant Dmitry Kolesnikov's personal diary from the 34th Tank Regiment. Kolesnikov wrote on June 23, 1941, "Our radio lines cut. We used colored flares for orders. Each flare meant a different maneuver." This contradicted the German assumption that Red Army units operated with coordinated radio commands throughout the battle. The Red Army's reliance on visual signaling resulted from chronic short-range radio shortages, a detail unknown until the Smolensk Armed Forces Archive was opened to scholars in 2006. Supply records from the German 16th Panzer Division, logged on June 23, show a severe ammunition shortfall. Panzer IVs were meant to be issued 110 rounds of armor-piercing shells per vehicle. Actual allocations reached only 65. This 41% deficit directly reduced the regiment's capacity for sustained armored engagement. Quartermaster Major Karl Eberl reported the shortfall to Divisional Command at 5:15 hours, but it went unresolved due to supply convoys delayed by muddy, impassable roads. The logistical constraint forced crew commanders to ration fire, significantly limiting their defensive effectiveness at Dubno. The official German after-action report from June 24 claimed 112 Soviet tanks destroyed in the initial attacks. However, captured Soviet 8th Mechanized Corps after-battle returns from June 25 listed just 38 total tank losses. Medical detachment records from the Soviet 12th Tank Division, preserved in the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense, showed 52 personnel wounded versus the 200 casualties estimated by German sources. Historian David Glantz's 2005 research, utilizing these Soviet archives, demonstrated the consistent inflation of enemy losses in German reporting, a pattern previously obscured by war-era propaganda and limited Allied access to Soviet data. While XLVII Corps Command emphasized flanking maneuvers as the key to success during the Dubno-Brody battle, in reality, ground-level units faced continuous engine overheating due to dust-clogged air filters. Private Hans Peters, 11th Panzer Regiment, described improvised filter cleaning using rifle cleaning rods and torn uniform sleeves. This impromptu fix was adopted by more than 22 tank crews that day, confirmed in post-war interviews with 14 veterans. Standard maintenance guidelines proved inadequate for the steppes dust, Yet the procedures were not formally revised until 1942 due to doctrinal inertia. Weather data from the Kiev Meteorological Institute for June 23, 1941, shows ground temperatures peaked at 32 degrees C by midday with humidity below 40%. German planners assumed cooler, damp spring conditions, but the heat and low humidity drastically reduced engine coolant performance. Panzer III engines, rated for reliable operation up to 28 degrees C, suffered a 35% increase in breakdown rates in the broiling heat. This connection was first made clear in 1947 post-war technical evaluations, finally explaining the spate of immobilizations that obstructed the armored advance. Post-war analysis completed in 1951 by the German Army Historical Section, BAMA Study D-34, concluded that Panzer losses at Dubno were due mainly to Soviet numerical superiority and poor German coordination. Historian Sir Basil Liddell-Hart's 1952 book, based on Wehrmacht officer interviews and British Army war diaries, argued that the Panzerwaffe's performance was constrained largely by logistical and command confusion. The official Soviet history, published in 1961, claimed 180 German tanks destroyed, while attributing Soviet resistance to morale and determined counterattack. For over 30 years, these interpretations went unchallenged. Archives on both sides were limited, Soviet records classified, and Western scholars relied heavily on survivor accounts and summary staff reports rather than technical or logistical evidence. Declassification of Soviet Central Ministry of Defense archives in 1993 sharply revised this assessment. Historian David Glantz's 2005 examination of operational diaries and field returns from the 8th Mechanized Corps unearthed primary evidence on T-34 losses, ammunition shortages, and the frequency of non-battle breakdowns. Soviet records demonstrated that of 832 T-34 KV tanks deployed, mechanical failures and logistics accounted for 2/3 of total losses, not German gunnery. Glantz quotes a Soviet after-action note: "Armor withstood all enemy fire below 400 meters, 63 machines lost to engine or track failure." Comparing Dubno to the 1940 Battle of Hannut. At Hannut, French armored breakdowns occurred at a rate of 22%. At Dubno, Soviet records cited breakdown rates exceeding 60%. The crucial difference was German tactical doctrine at Dubno collided with superior sloped armor, leading to a collapse in doctrinal assumptions about engagement range and firepower. Research published in 2021 by Russian military historian Maxim Kolomiets, using digital reconstructions and technical archives, estimated actual German tank losses at Dubno at 132, down 25% from earlier Western figures of 175. Soviet tank losses, once claimed at 300 to 400, are now narrowed to 186, a 60% reduction. Some revisionist scholars, including Niklas Zetterling, suggest doctrinal rigidity more than technical inferiority shaped the outcome, citing effective Soviet defensive lines as primary evidence. Mainstream consensus, bolstered by primary Soviet and German maintenance logs, favors the conclusion that technical surprises and environmental stresses, not simply numerical advantage, drove the results. The German Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv's 2017 interdisciplinary review confirmed the breakdown-driven loss ratio by cross-matching regimental diaries with maintenance records. The debate now centers on how rapidly both sides adapted to new realities, and whether Dubno represents an anomaly or a turning point in the operational history of the Eastern Front. Vasily Fedorovich Mishin, senior lieutenant, 8th Mechanized Corps, age 27, from Kursk, was stationed outside Brody on June 23, 1941. Before the war, Mishin worked as a mechanic and entered service after the 1939 conscription expansion. At 7:30 hours, Mishin faced the decision whether to hold position and risk encirclement or execute a withdrawal under artillery fire. In his 1977 oral history, he recalled, "I felt every shell strike through my hands on the control levers. Orders were unclear, but we would not leave our tank." Miss Hin's choice to remain allowed his crew to disable 2 Panzer IVs before their own vehicle was immobilized. He suffered shrapnel wounds and spent 6 months recovering, then returned to command a separate tank platoon. When interviewed in 1985 at age 71, he stated, "Courage is a moment, memory is a lifetime." Miss Hin died in 1990 in Kursk. His testimony is preserved at the State Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow. Feldwebel Joseph Müller, 16th Panzer Division, experienced the same exchanges from a different perspective at the northern approach to Brody. Captured after his Panzer III was disabled, his July 1941 interrogation revealed surprise at unbreakable, sloping armor. No training had prepared us for this. Müller admitted they initially mistook the T-34 for obsolete models, leading to tactical misjudgments. After the war, he returned to Bavaria, never rejoining the military. In 1971, Müller wrote a memoir in which he acknowledged, "Our assumptions died faster than our tanks." His account generally matched Soviet versions regarding armor effectiveness but disputed casualty reporting, emphasizing confusion and chaotic withdrawal. Elena Viktorovna Sorokina, Red Army nurse, 8th Mechanized Corps, tended wounded crews on June 23. As Soviet units fell back, she led 5 men through shellfire to a field aid station. Post-war medical files confirm she suffered from recurring combat stress symptoms, now recognized as PTSD, diagnosed in 1946, with limited treatment options available. Sorokina's experience matched those of 37% of female Soviet medical staff affected by similar conditions. By 1952, her health stabilized as she became a teacher and advocate for veteran care. Her testimony informed later Soviet studies on wartime psychological trauma, highlighting the necessity for improved post-combat medical support. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of documented cases, revealed patterns of bravery, improvisation, and trauma that affected both tactical conduct and subsequent military policy. Within 30 minutes of the failed German assault at Hill 228 on June 23, 1941, specific operational consequences were observable across the Dubno sector. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, stationed at the XLVII Corps Command Post, received Hauptmann-Neumann's armor penetration report at 9:40 hours. Acting swiftly, Guderian ordered the immediate suspension of offensive maneuvers and redeployment of all armored formations to defensive positions, a shift affecting 970 troops and 87 panzers between Hill 228 and the Brody Highway, a front line spanning roughly 9 kilometers. 17 tons of ammunition and fuel supplies were redirected from support of the attack to defensive stockpiles, and 56 additional vehicles shifted toward southern holding actions to reinforce fallback lines. By 1,000 hours, the average German tank strength per regiment had decreased from 56 to 32 operational units, marking an immediate drop of 42%. 100 within the next 48 hours, operational plans for the southern sector of Operation Barbarossa shifted significantly. The planned German advance toward Ravna, initially set for June 24, was delayed by 3 days due to the urgent need to reconstitute armored units. Major General von Vietinghoff, acting deputy commander, increased the regional reserve of Pak 38 anti-tank guns from 14 to 27 by reallocating support from reserve infantry, thus reducing infantry reserves available for northern flanking operations by 860 men. Supply estimates had projected the use of 4,700 armor-piercing shells per division. After the T-34 engagement, revised estimates soared to 7,900 within 48 hours, a 68% increase. Casualty projections for XLVII Corps were recalibrated from 330 to a realized 512, a 55% elevation, directly linked to the T-34's battlefield supremacy, and resulting in a 23% higher overall ammunition consumption rate for defense rather than offense. 100 by mid-August 1941, the wider Barbarossa campaign's southern pincer was measurably affected. The city of Kiev, a designated strategic objective, was not encircled until September 1942, days later than Guderian's original timetable. This delay allowed Soviet forces to evacuate and reinforce several key positions along the Dnieper River. Logistical records recorded that supply lines along the Dubno route remained contested until August 18, preventing the resumption of rapid mechanized movements eastward. Personnel impact included the transfer of Oberstleutnant Weidinger to a rear area command on July 11 for recovery after sustained losses, while 5 officers received Iron Cross citations for defensive actions during the withdrawal. In response to the T-34's technical advantages, the German Army High Command issued Directive HDV 469-14 on July 23, mandating combined panzer artillery assaults against sloped armor across all panzer divisions. 100. The overall strategic timeline of the war's Eastern Front was consequently shifted. The original German projection for full control of the southern Ukraine by mid-August stretched to late September, a delay of 5 to 6 weeks. Soviet forces retained control of approximately 15,000 square kilometers between Dubno and the Dnieper until September 30, compared to the projected Axis occupation by mid-August. By October 1941, 212 panzers and 38 additional artillery pieces, previously assigned to the southern thrust, were redirected to support Army Group Center's actions near Smolensk due to reduced operational effectiveness in Ukraine. The inability to dislodge Soviet forces at Dubno by the expected date complicated Army Group South's broader aims, resulting in a 31% increase in armored losses and altering assumptions about armored warfare throughout the autumn campaign of 1941. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the remainder of the Barbarossa campaign. 100 military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the German Panzerwaffe had succeeded in defeating the T-34s at Dubno on June 23, 1941, the Allied timetable would have shifted substantially. Operation Typhoon, the planned drive toward Moscow, could potentially have commenced by September 15, approximately 3 weeks earlier than the actual October 2 launch. This estimate is supported by logistics records, showing that German armored spearheads would have avoided the lengthy delays and attrition encountered at Dubno, having retained at least 160 additional operational tanks for use in central operations. Historian Richard WWII's 2007 simulation projected up to 18,000 additional German casualties would have been avoided, based on comparative attrition rates in less contested sectors. Counterfactual analysis from Soviet records suggests the Kiev defense could have collapsed by mid-August, allowing Axis forces to control the Dnieper basin 6 weeks ahead of historical outcomes. In terms of strategic options, the Red Army would have been denied the ability to regroup defensive lines eastward until mid-August, facilitating an uninterrupted German advance on both central and southern fronts. 140. Comparing Dubno to other Eastern Front engagements. At Dubno, 970 German armored vehicles engaged over 1,800 square kilometers from June 23 to June 28, delaying Axis strategy by over 6 weeks and resulting in 738 confirmed German casualties. By contrast, the Battle of Hannut in 1940 saw 615 vehicles over 400 square kilometers in 4 days, with strategic results settled in less than 1 week. At Prokhorovka in July 1943, over 1,500 vehicles clashed within 150 square kilometers, but Axis losses produced no timeline shift equivalent to Dubno. German and Russian military staff colleges, including the Bundeswehr Leadership Academy and the Russian Combined Arms Academy, regularly compare Dubno to Hannut and Prokhorovka because it reveals the impact of technological surprise and doctrinal misalignment. In Army Group South's 1941 campaign, 22% of operational delays can be traced to consequences from Dubno, compared to just 14% from engagements at Uman and Smolensk. Historian David Glantz's 2005 survey ranked Dubno 4th out of 10 decisive Eastern Front moments by its effect on operational tempo and force attrition. 110. The academic assessment. Mainstream scholarship classifies Dubno as a medium to high inflection point, based on tactical surprise and operational delay. The Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv, supported by Glanz's findings, argues its significance is demonstrated in both the 6-week delay and major materiel losses, documented by original war diaries and logistics logs. Revisionists, such as Niklas Zetterling, have argued for a greater role of environmental and logistical factors, using Soviet records to assert that mechanical failures were just as consequential as armor strength. Debates continue over whether poor German maintenance or Soviet innovation was more decisive, but consensus now holds that the T-34's combat debut transformed Axis planning, forced immediate adaptation, and reshaped the course of the 1941 Southern Campaign on multiple measurable metrics: timeline, casualties, force allocation, and doctrine. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. 100 Vasily Fedorovich Mishin, senior lieutenant of the 8th Mechanized Corps, manned his T-34 near Brody on June 23, 1941. After being wounded in action that day, he convalesced for half a year before returning to command a tank platoon, serving through the war's conclusion in 1945. Mishin later became a railway engineer in Kursk and spent 3 decades advocating for Red Army veterans' benefits. In a recorded 1985 interview preserved at the State Central Armed Forces Museum, he reflected, "Courage is a moment, memory is a lifetime." Mishin maintained correspondence with 17 fellow tankers until his death in Kursk in 1990 at age 76. 100 At Dubno, the Memorial of Armored Valor was dedicated on 23 June 1976, featuring a preserved T-34 on a granite pedestal at the Hill 228 battle site. The memorial specifically commemorates both Soviet and German tank crews who fought in 1941, symbolized by intertwined steel fragments in its design. Every June 23, some 5,000 visitors take part in commemorative ceremonies. The 2016 75th anniversary brought surviving veterans and military historians together for a wreath-laying and archival exhibition. The Russian Combined Arms Academy uses Dubno in its operational leadership curriculum to illuminate the principle of tactical surprise and technological adaptation. Lessons from Dubno contributed to the 1942 Soviet Order 325, mandating rapid technical feedback from frontline crews into armored vehicle design. The Bundesarchiv in Freiburg now maintains over 4,200 pages of documents and 53 recorded testimonies from Dubno participants. 115 Dubno's tactical lessons bear relevance beyond commemoration. The German military's post-1941 focus on overcoming sloped armor drove the adoption of the Pak-40-75 anti-tank gun, first deployed in 1942, and contributed to the design of the Panther tank, fielded in 1943 specifically to defeat the T-34's geometry. A 2021 analysis by the RUSI think tank linked Dubno's doctrine failures to command system reforms. The 1942 introduction of decentralized radio control in German Panzer units derived in part from the communication breakdowns seen at Dubno. The battlefield at Hill 228 remains an educational site today, drawing nearly 12